My name is Nora Callahan. I was 32 years old when I walked back into Mercy General Hospital wearing a lanyard that said visiting clinician and carrying a badge that didn't show my real credentials. The badge was intentional. So was the lanyard. So was everything about that day, down to the shoes I chose. Plain black flats, the kind that don't make noise on polished floors. My brother was chief of surgery. Had been for 4 years. I found out on the Tuesday in October, scrolling through a hospital newsletter someone had forwarded to our mother. There was his photo, older, fuller in the face, wearing a white coat with his name stitched in blue thread. Dr. Nathan Callahan, Chief of Surgery, Mercy General. Our mother had written beneath it with 3 exclamation points, so proud of my boy. I didn't respond to that text for 6 days. The thing about Nathan is that he always knew how to stand in the right light. Family dinners, residency ceremonies, every moment that mattered. He had a way of positioning himself so the attention landed exactly where he wanted it. And he was brilliant. Genuinely, which made it worse. Brilliant people who also know how to perform brilliance are dangerous in ways that take years to name. I had named it at 29. That was the year the medical board suspended my license. The complaint had come from a patient I had treated in the ICU during my 3rd year as an attending at St. Leet. Bridget's. A woman named Mrs. Alderton, 71, admitted for a cardiac event. I had adjusted her medication dosage after reviewing her chart and catching an error in her initial intake assessment. She stabilized. She went home. 11 days later, her family filed a complaint alleging I had made an unauthorized change to her protocol without consulting the attending cardiologist on record. The cardiologist on record was my brother. He had rotated through St. Bridget's for 3 months on a consulting basis. He had signed off on Mrs. Alderton's original intake, and when the board opened its investigation, he provided a written statement saying he had never been informed of the change, that he had never been consulted, and that in his professional opinion, the modification I made had put the patient at unnecessary risk. None of that was true. I had called him twice. The first call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know because I checked my phone records the moment I got the board notification. He had said, "Yeah, okay, sounds fine. I trust you," and then hung up because he was scrubbing in. I had documented the consultation in the chart. Brief, time-stamped, initialed. But the chart had been updated after my entry, not deleted. Just updated, a small change, clinical language, nothing that would flag a casual review. My note was still there, but the formatting had shifted in a way that made it appear to follow rather than precede the cardiologist's sign-off. It looked like I had documented after the fact to cover myself. I don't know how long it took him to arrange that. I used to try to calculate it. Lying awake at 2 in the morning in my apartment in Dayton after I'd moved back home because I couldn't afford my rent without a salary, I'd try to figure out exactly when he decided that my advancement was too inconvenient for his own. We had both applied for the same fellowship at Kellerman Institute the previous spring. It was a 2-year surgical research position that fed directly into department head nominations at 3 major hospital systems in the Midwest. I was ranked first in the cohort. Nathan was ranked 3rd. The program took 1 candidate. I withdrew my application the week the board investigation opened. The suspension lasted 18 months, and at the end of it, the board reinstated me with conditions: a 2-year supervised practice period, mandatory review of all complex cases, a letter of restriction that followed me to every credentialing committee I faced after that. I worked those 2 years in a rural clinic in eastern Ohio, 40 minutes from the nearest stoplight, seeing 40 patients a day with a supervisor who called in by phone every Friday to sign off on my charts. She was kind about it. She never made me feel like I was being watched. But I was being watched, and I knew it, and the knowing changes something in you that doesn't fully come back. I didn't confront Nathan, not because I didn't know. I knew. I had known probably before I could say it out loud. But confrontation was what he expected. He would have been prepared for it. He would have had the right expressions, the right grief, the right confusion. He would have said something like, "Nora, I reported what I saw," with that specific tone he had, measured, sad, disappointed, and I would have been the one who looked unstable for accusing my own brother of falsifying a medical record. So I didn't. I completed my supervised period. I sat for recredentialing. I moved to Cincinnati. I built a caseload back up from nothing. one referral at a time, working out of a small practice that served a population most hospitals didn't recruit for uninsured, underinsured, Medicaid patients. People who had learned not to expect much from doctors and were grateful and cautious in equal measure. I was good at that work. I had always been good at that work. It was the part Nathan never cared about. The slow, unglamorous part of medicine where nobody puts your photo in the newsletter. I'd been in Cincinnati for 2 years when I got the letter. It came from the Ohio Medical Quality Review Commission, which sounds official and is, and it informed me that a peer review process had identified a pattern of elevated risk factors in my case management from the supervised period and that my file had been flagged for secondary review. The letter was 4 paragraphs, dense with procedural language, and it said almost nothing, but what it said was this: someone had filed a secondary complaint. Someone had gone back through the supervised period, 2 years of spotless, documented, reviewed work, and found something they wanted the commission to look at. The return address on the envelope was a law firm in Columbus. I sat with the letter for a long time at my kitchen table. The coffee I'd made went cold. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn even though it was 53 degrees. I could hear the mower stuttering over the November ground, and I remember thinking that was a strange thing to be doing. And then I stopped thinking about the lawn and read the letter again from the beginning. Then I called my friend Deborah. Deborah Chow had been 2 years ahead of me at Ohio State. She was now an attorney specializing in physician licensing defense, which is a very specific kind of law that exists because the medical credentialing system is labyrinthine enough that physicians regularly need someone who speaks both languages. She had helped me through the first suspension. She picked up on the second ring. "Who's the law firm?" she asked, before I even finished explaining. I read her the name. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nora. That firm handles hospital liability, not patient advocacy, not malpractice. Hospital liability and internal credentialing disputes." I said I knew. She said, "Someone on the inside filed this." I said I knew that too. What I didn't tell her yet, what I hadn't told anyone, was that 3 weeks earlier, I had received a job posting forwarded by a colleague, a hospitalist position at Mercy General in Columbus, mid-level. Not glamorous. But Mercy General had just received a federal designation as a Level 1 trauma center, which meant expanded funding, expanded staffing, and, more importantly, an external peer review process that would be conducted by the Joint Commission over the following year. Joint Commission reviews look at everything: charts, staffing decisions, credentialing histories, incident reports. They are the most comprehensive external audit a hospital can face. I had already submitted my application, under my legal name, Nora Callahan, because that was my name and I had done nothing wrong. But I had submitted it without flagging my relationship to the chief of surgery because no application asks that question. And I had decided to find out whether his name would be a door or a wall before I decided what to do next. It turned out to be a wall with a keyhole. I got a call back. Then an interview with the hospitalist department coordinator. Then a second interview. At no point did anyone mention my brother. At no point did I volunteer it. I was offered the position on a Thursday afternoon, conditional on credentialing approval. The credentialing committee met the following month. I sat outside that room on a plastic chair for 40 minutes. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. A custodian mopped the same square of floor twice. I watched him and thought about the first time I had ever been in a hospital. 7 years old, a broken wrist from falling off a fence in our backyard, and how certain I had been, even then, that this was where I was supposed to be. I had not stopped being certain of that. That was the part my brother could never account for. He could alter a chart. He could draft a statement. He could bury me in procedural language. But he couldn't make me uncertain. The committee called me in. There were 6 people around the table. I recognized the chief medical officer, Dr. Tare, Patricia Osei, from her photo on the hospital's website. She had a reputation as someone who read everything herself and remembered it. Sitting to her left was a man I didn't recognize at first. He was older, gray at the temples, posture that suggested military or athletics, something that had trained the stillness into him. He was looking at a folder in front of him and not at me. Then he looked up. It was Dr. Kenneth Whitmore. He had been the program director at Kellerman Institute when I applied for the fellowship. We had met once, briefly, at a reception. He had told me my research proposal was the strongest he had read in 3 years of directing the program. I had thanked him. He had moved on to talk to someone else. That was the entire extent of our history. He looked at me across that table and said nothing for a moment. Then he looked back down at his folder. Dr. Osei asked me to walk the committee through the suspension and the supervised period. I did. I had done it before. I used the same language I always used. Factual, calm, no editorializing, no apology for things I hadn't done wrong. I explained the documentation. I explained the chart discrepancy. I explained the phone records. I explained that the Secondary Review Commission had ultimately declined to pursue the case forwarded by the law firm after reviewing my full supervised period record, which I had obtained and submitted as part of this credentialing packet. That last part was recent. Deborah had moved quickly. When I finished, Dr. Whitmore put the folder down. He said, "Ms. Callahan, Dr. Callahan, I have a question, and I want to be direct with you because I think this situation deserves directness." He folded his hands. "The cardiologist whose statement formed the basis of your original suspension. What is your relationship to him?" The room was quiet, not tense exactly, but attentive, the kind of quiet where people are listening carefully to how you answer, not just to what you say. I said, "He's my brother." Someone shifted in their chair. Not dramatically, just a small adjustment, the kind a person makes when they're absorbing something. Dr. Whitmore nodded. He picked up one page from the folder. He said, "I'd like to read something into the record of this meeting." He looked at Dr. Osei, who nodded. He said, "This is a letter I received 8 days ago from the Ohio State Medical Society's Ethics and Conduct Subcommittee. It concerns a complaint filed by a former colleague of your brother's at St. Bridget's, related to conduct during the period of the original complaint against you. I don't have authorization to share the specifics, but I can tell you that the subcommittee has opened a formal inquiry." I said nothing. He said, "I mention it because I want this committee to understand the full context in which Dr. Callahan's credentialing file must be read." Then he looked at me directly and said, "I remember your fellowship application. I remember it specifically. I want you to know that." What happened next was not dramatic the way it would be in a movie. Nobody stood up. Nobody made a speech. Dr. Osei asked 2 more questions about my current caseload and Cincinnati, which I answered. Then she excused me back to the hallway. I sat on that plastic chair for 22 minutes. When the door opened, it was the committee coordinator. She asked me to come back in. All 6 people were still at the table. Dr. Osei said the committee had voted to approve my credentialing without restriction, effective immediately upon completion of standard onboarding. She said, "Welcome to Mercy General, Dr. Callahan. I started on a Monday. My badge had my name on it, my credentials, my department. No asterisk, no notation. Just Nora Callahan, MD, hospitalist." My brother's office was on the 4th floor. Mine was on the 2nd. We used the same elevator bank. I saw him on my 3rd day. He was walking with 2 residents, explaining something, hands moving the way they always did when he was in teaching mode, fluid, confident, performing the confidence as much as feeling it. He saw me from the end of the hallway and stopped mid-sentence. The residents kept walking 2 steps before they realized he had stopped. He said my name. Not Nora, just Callahan, like we were colleagues who barely knew each other. I said good morning and kept walking. I did not stop. I did not give him the scene he was waiting to calibrate himself against. I just walked past him and turned the corner and let the moment close behind me like water. For the next 6 weeks, I worked. I saw patients. I documented carefully the way I had always documented thoroughly, specifically with timestamps. I attended department rounds. I introduced myself to the nursing staff by their names, which I had learned in advance. I showed up early. I stayed late when it mattered. I built the thing I had always built in every job, in every condition, a record that could be read by anyone and tell the same story. She showed up and she did the work and she did it right. The Joint Commission arrived in the 2nd week of February. They were there for 5 days. Teams of reviewers fanning out across departments, requesting charts, conducting interviews, sitting in on rounds. They were polite, thorough, and impossible to read. The hospital was tense in that way. Hospitals get, not visibly panicked, but aware. Everyone slightly more careful with their language, slightly more precise with their documentation. On the 3rd day, one of the Joint Commission's physician reviewers asked to speak with me informally. Her name was Dr. Sandra Ito. She was reviewing a sampling of hospitalist cases and had a question about a care transition I had managed in January. We sat in a small conference room off the nursing station. The question was straightforward. I answered it. Then she asked if I was aware of any systemic issues with the care coordination process between the hospitalist department and surgical services. I said I had observed some communication delays. She asked me to describe them. I described them. Factually, specifically, with dates because I had written them down. She rubbed something in her notebook and thanked me. The Joint Commission issued its findings 3 weeks later. The report was public record, which meant I read it the same day it was posted. The summary noted several areas of excellence and 2 areas of concern. The second area of concern, listed on page 11, cited irregular patterns in surgical case documentation and a documented lack of interdepartmental communication transparency in the Surgical Services Division. It recommended corrective action and a follow-up review in 12 months. I read that paragraph twice, not with satisfaction, exactly, something quieter than that. Mathan was removed from the chief of surgery position 4 days later. The hospital's press statement cited a mutual decision to restructure leadership in the surgical department, that is, hospital language for something that was not mutual at all. He retained his surgical privileges and his faculty appointment because hospitals are cautious about those things, but the title is gone. The newsletter they sent out the following month had a new name in the chief of surgery photo. He called me once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 40 seconds long. He said he didn't understand why I was doing this. He said he had made a mistake, that he knew that things had gotten complicated. He said he hoped we could talk. I saved the voicemail. I did not call back. Not because I was waiting for something more. Not because I needed him to say the specific words in the specific order. I had stopped needing that a long time ago. I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that closure is not a thing another person gives you. It's a thing you build yourself quietly in the years when no one is watching, out of the work you do and the patience you show up for and the records that tell the truth even when the people around them are trying to rewrite it. I did not want his apology. I wanted the record to be accurate, and now it was. The following spring, Deborah called to tell me that the Ohio State Medical Society's Ethics Subcommittee had concluded its inquiry. Mathan received a formal censure and was required to complete a professional ethics education program. His record now reflected it. I was at the hospital when she called, standing at the window at the end of the second-floor hallway, watching the parking lot fill up with the early morning shift. Nurses, techs, lab staff, the people who make a hospital run before most patients even wake up. I listened to what Deborah said. I thanked her. We made plans to have dinner the following week. After I hung up, I stayed at the window for a few minutes. Then I went back to work. 6 months later, Dr. Doc Whitmore contacted me about a mentorship program he was developing for physicians re-entering practice after licensing challenges. He had spoken with Dr. Osei about it. He asked if I would be willing to serve as an advisor. He said, "We need people who understand what that path actually looks like. Not theoretically, people who have walked it." I said yes. The program met on the first Saturday of every month in a conference room at the Ohio State Medical Center. It was not a large group, usually 8 or 10 people, sometimes fewer. Some were coming back from addiction. Some from billing errors, some from things that were their fault, and some from things that weren't. I didn't distinguish between those categories when we were in the room together. What mattered was what came next. How you rebuilt the record. How you relearned to trust your own judgment when the system had spent years telling you your judgment was the problem. I didn't give speeches. I sat with people and asked questions. I told them what I knew, which was specific and hard-won. I told them the documentation mattered. I told them the timestamps mattered. I told them that the work was the thing, not the title, not the vindication, not the moment when the person who wronged you finally had to account for it. The work was what you could control. The work was what endured. Sometimes someone would look at me and ask if it ever really got better. I always told them the truth. I said yes, not all at once, and not the way you're picturing it right now. But yes, you put the work down and you pick it up again, and one day the weight of it is different. Not lighter exactly, but more familiar. You know how to carry it. And that is not nothing. That is, in fact, most of it. I drove home from those meetings on dark winter roads with the heater running and the radio off. Past the exits I knew from residency, past the county line, past the water tower with the faded team name I'd grown up reading. I had lived in so many versions of this state. I had left parts of myself in hospital corridors and clinic waiting rooms and parking lots where I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I did not miss those parking lots, but I did not regret them either, because they were the reason I knew how to sit with someone who was afraid of walking through a door and say, with complete honesty, I have been in that exact spot, and I walk through. And I am still here, and so will you be. That is the only credential that matters in that room. Not where I trained, not what my brother did or didn't do, not the years I lost or the fellowship I didn't take. Just the simple, plain fact that I showed up. That I kept showing up, even when the record was wrong about me, even when the people with the pens were not telling the truth. Eventually, the truth becomes the record. That's what I know now. That's what I would tell the version of myself sitting in that Ohio apartment at 2 in the morning, staring at a phone log, calculating the cost of what my brother had done. I would say, keep the phone log, document everything, do the work. It will be enough. I used to think the hardest part was losing the license. It wasn't. The hardest part was learning to live inside a story that wasn't true, where everyone who read the file saw something that hadn't happened, and the person who made it that way was someone who had taught me to ride a bike in our parents' driveway. That's the thing nobody warns you about when a family member betrays you. It doesn't just cost you the thing they took. It costs you your ability to trust your own memory of who they were. Every good thing you remember about them becomes a question mark. Every time Nathan had ever been kind to me, and he had been, genuinely, when we were young, I had to hold that up against what he did to that chart and wonder which version of him was the real one. I think now that they both were. People contain that kind of contradiction. Understanding it didn't make it hurt less, but it stopped the wondering, and that was worth something. What I know about how actions compound over time. I didn't have a word for it at 29, sitting in that apartment with the phone records printed out on the kitchen table. I just knew that what Nathan had done was specific and deliberate, and that specificity leaves traces. He had signed his name twice to the same lie. He had used the same language, the same reasoning, across 12 years. And the very thoroughness of it, the detail, the repetition, was what eventually made it visible to people like Kenneth, who read carefully and remembered what he read. That's what I mean when I say the work matters more than the vindication. I didn't expose Nathan. His own record exposed him. Every shortcut he took, every decision he made to cut someone else down rather than build himself up, it accumulated. It became a pattern that a review board could see. And my record, the one I had built in eastern Ohio with 40 patients a day and a phone supervisor and no audience at all, that accumulated too. It became the thing that Kenneth Whitmore remembered walking into that credentialing room. Integrity is not invisible. It doesn't always get seen immediately. Sometimes it takes years. But it does not disappear. And the absence of integrity does not disappear either. Nathan spent years constructing a version of himself, the brilliant surgeon, the decorated chief, and it was real. It was built from real skill and real work. But it had a fault line running through it. That fault line was the choices he made when he thought no one was measuring them. The falsified chart, the signed statement, the law firm letter. Nobody builds a legacy on that foundation without it eventually shifting. Deborah called it justice. I don't think that's quite the right word for me. Justice implies a verdict, something delivered from the outside. What happened felt more like correction, the record adjusting itself back toward the truth because enough people looked carefully enough for long enough. I was one of those people. Kenneth was another. The colleague at St. Bridget's who finally filed the ethics complaint was another. None of us coordinated. We just each did the specific, unglamorous work of documenting what we saw. That's what I tell the people who come to those Saturday meetings. Not that everything will be fixed. Not that the person who wronged you will face consequences on any timeline you can predict or control, but that the work you do with integrity in the rooms where nobody is handing out credit is not wasted. It is building something. You may not see what it's building for a long time. I didn't, but I kept the phone logs. I kept the timestamps. I showed up. Eventually, the record told the truth. That was enough. That has always been enough.